Hello and welcome to another book chat with Angelique and Kara. And
Hello.
hello, today we are here in Texas, ending our spring break this week. And because, as everyone knows, we are in a global pandemic, there's not a whole lot of traveling going on. We didn't go anywhere this week. We thought that we would bring you some books that offer an escape into their pages, like not like all books don't to some extent, but we have escape books today.
Yeah, so I picked a couple of stories that I read recently that I really loved and completely transport you to another time and place. Not a typical travel sort of book. Almost everything I read is sci-fi and fantasy, and these are no exception. But these two books also have a great, like, cinematic, fast-paced action quality. So you can read them if you're at home like we are on spring break. Will immerse you in a story that you will not want to put down.
Definitely. And I think science fiction and fantasy very much lend themselves as genres to escapist literature. I'm a big fan of, I know you read more sci-fi than fantasy, and I read more fantasy than sci-fi. And we both read other things too, but this topic this month, I think, really gets into our wheelhouse a little bit.
Yeah,
So do you want to start this time? Why don't you
yeah,
give yours?
yeah. I'll be happy to start with the book I just read. So it's on my Kindle, so it should pop right up there. This is The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. Yes, Johnson. So this one just came out last year. And I joined a book club with a group of neighbors. So we're going to be discussing it in a couple of weeks on a socially distant patio gathering. But yeah, fantastic science fiction, very post-apocalyptic future setting. So I love the way she doesn't spell anything out. So you don't know what year it is or exactly what happened in Earth's past, but very clearly post-apocalyptic, some major climate change has happened and some major socioeconomic upheaval. It has a very Mad Max feel to it. In terms of some of the bad guys in the story. Has two futuristic cities where one is very privileged. It's a really great story about class and privilege and the choices, both the choices that people make that determine their future, as well as their upbringing, that some people are luckier than others. But the main character is named Kara. She goes by Kara Menta or Kara Lee. Her names change a bit throughout the book. But she is capable of traveling between dimensions.
Interesting.
And so in this future, there is a scientist, researcher who comes up with a way for individuals to travel between dimensions. But the catch is it's only possible if that person has already died in the other dimension. So based on something bad that happened to them there. So it's not a bright, shiny, happy story.
So you don't have like doppelgangers running into each other in the different dimensions or something like that.
There's a vague physics reason, and they don't bother trying to come up with an explanation. It just doesn't work. You can't be in the same space as your doppelganger. But needless to say, the only people who can travel are the ones who are generally very poor backgrounds, very difficult backgrounds, and they've just been lucky enough or just made the right choices to have survived in this world. But I love any story that has a strong female character, and it's beautiful to see how she survives, how she thrives, the relationship with her friends, with her sister, her mother. There's a lot of heart in the story, as well as some really great sci-fi action.
Cool. And so that you said the main character's name is Kara?
Yeah, with a
Like
C.
you? Did you find it strange to read a book where the protagonist has your name?
I have an unusual name, so it doesn't come up very often. But yeah, I admit that was one of the reasons it caught my eye as something that I definitely wanted to read.
Yeah. I don't find my name in literature very often either. And when I do, it's almost always Gothic literature. Right? My mother named me after a vampire witch on a soap opera. Like,
I never knew that.
yeah, Dark Shadows, the original in the 1960s. Yeah.
Wow.
So good times. Yeah. But every time I found my name in literature, it was, the character was a ghost or a witch or a vampire or an ingenue, right? Which I think those characters really only exist in Gothic literature anymore. Right? Like we don't really
Cool.
have a lot of patience for those anymore. Like in French, like in French literature, you'll find my name a little more often, obviously it being a French name,
I
but those
can't think of any
characters
of the
usually,
Karas that I've found in literature. Obviously,
yeah,
Kara Thrace in Battlestar
Kara Thrace.
Galactica,
Well, that's a
and
great character.
Kara Danvers, Supergirl. So
Yes, yes,
can't be
both
sad about that.
awesome characters. Not that vampires, ghosts, and witches aren't awesome characters in their own right, I suppose.
Cool, cool. So tell me
Anyway.
about your book.
Well, today I am traveling into the Erin Morgenstern universe. The first book I'm going to talk about is her debut novel, The Night Circus, which is a pretty spectacular novel. It is, I will admit, it's one of my favorite books. And the way that I often describe it is late Victorian magic realism. It's not an old book. Like it just came out in 2011, right? So it's only been out about 10 years. But it is set in the 19th century, sort of the late 19th century, and just at the turn of the beginning of the 20th century, but mostly in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, right? So it's mostly in there. It is a non-linear novel, which means that it does not go in chronological order. I mean, certain parts of it do, but there are multiple characters' storylines, and they are not all happening at exactly the same moment. One of the things that Erin Morgenstern has done in both of her books is create what I like to think of as braided stories, less so in The Night Circus than in her second book, but you have multiple characters' storylines that become woven in with each other, right? So we have a little bit of that in The Night Circus. And one of the very important characters isn't born until a significant time after all of the rest of the main characters, right? So we have to catch his story up while the others are happening concurrently. And so the novel does jump around in time a little bit. I will say that it is not confusing. If you read the chapter titles, which are date stamped and location stamped, if you pay attention to those, it's really not hard to figure out. And it creates this gorgeous multi-layered story. The idea, it is about a circus, and I am not a person who likes the circus in general. I've been. If it were more like this circus, I would probably enjoy it a lot more, but I generally have never been a fan of the circus myself. But this is a magic circus, and if it's magic,
Yeah,
I'm more interested.
yeah.
And so
Remember if there were animals in that circus. I don't
there were cats.
Okay.
There were cats. There is a married couple who perform in the circus, who do tricks with great cats, and they have twin children who perform tricks with kittens. And the twin children are actually really important characters. And so the idea behind this is you have two characters. One of them is named Celia and one of them is named Marco, and they are magical competitors in this timeless competition about magic and the performance of magic and the pedagogy of teaching magic and illusion. And most of the rest of the people in this world have no idea that magic is real. So they compete with each other in the venue, the Night Circus, the Circus of Dreams is what it's called, the Cirque de Rêve. And it just gets more and more intense and florid and beautiful. And it is also a love story, which, you know, I love love stories. And I don't know, there's a lot of Shakespeare allusion woven in. There's a lot of other literary allusions. There are references to Poe. There's references to steampunk. There are all kinds of other things that are very little subtle details here and there. They're not huge parts of the story, but they're little subtle details. And I don't know, Morgenstern's style is just very high concept in that way, and intelligent and well read. And she has, I think, kind of a distinctive writing style. Like the cadences of her sentences are very distinctive. And anyway, it's just an amazing story. There's very little else that I could say about the plot that doesn't give away too much, but I will say that this is the kind of book that hooks you in from pretty much the first chapter. And if you are intrigued by the first chapter, you will probably really love this book. And I'm only saying that because it's one of my favorites.
You're making me want to read it again, because it's been years.
It's so good. There's so many little things that are sort of moments in the plot that fans of this book like to copy, like the way that some of the characters dress, and the midnight dinner parties, which are a thing at the inception of the circus. I remember we've had some midnight dinner parties ourselves. The color scheme, black and white with a pop of
white with a pop of red.
Yeah, really good stuff. Really good stuff. Anyway, I can't say enough good things about this book. One last thing that I will say is that I have reread this book many times because I teach it. And this is one of those books that actually holds up every time you read it. Like, it doesn't start to get ridiculous after the fourth or fifth time. It's still gorgeous. And by the time, like, I have notes, this is not my school copy. My school copy is in my classroom, but I have notes all over it. And toward the end, I actually just have one note at the top of one of the chapters. The writing is so good, I want to cry. It's just it's beautiful. It's beautiful, beautiful writing. Night Circus, everybody should read it.
Yay! Great.
Yes.
Cool. Well, let me tell you about the second one that I wanted to mention today. The Left-Handed Booksellers of London. I think I mentioned this to you a few months ago. Garth Nix just published it. And this is a testament to the world we live in. Rather than doing in-person book signings, he just signed little cards.
Nice.
Yeah, because I think he had planned on traveling around the US and yeah, at some point he will again, and we'll get to meet him in person. But yeah,
we'll do in-person book launches again one day. Yeah.
Australian author, author of the Abhorsen series. You've read that series, Sabriel, Lyriel, yeah.
Anish gave those to me. He said, "These are my favorite books."
Fantastic in the YA genre, but for anyone, great series. So this is a standalone novel, although there's certainly room for him to take it, you know, to write some other books in the series. And great fantasy with a really simple premise. A girl who's late teens, early 20s, who doesn't know who her father is. She was raised by her mother. Single mom, very loving person, but who's never had a word to say about who dad was. And every time she's asked her, it's just sort of been like, yeah, like no name, no. And so she got a hint about some guy she's mentioned that at least seemed important in her life. So she's going to go to London, meet with this guy, but also spend some time in London. She's a young adult trying to figure herself out. And it takes off from there in a pretty crazy fantasy direction that I don't even want to say too much about, other than it's a beautifully crafted story. You meet a young wizard named Merlin, and it's just tongue-in-cheek that they chose that name. I think when his parents chose that name, they were being a little jokey about it.
Right.
He is a left-handed bookseller of London. They run a bunch of bookstores, and they're also wizards. And him and his sister are prominent characters, and oh gosh, it goes from there. But needless to say, she does search and find her dad, and they get mixed up in all sorts of crazy action scenes. And there's a really wonderful, now I wish I knew more about Celtic mythology, because you could probably tell me how much of it is traditional Celtic myths that were woven in versus Garth Nix's imagination. But there's a bit of a sense of, I guess, animism, the fact that a mountain or a tree or a stone might have a spirit associated with it. There's some narrative and some character about that are woven in that's just incredible, as well as some sort of goblin and troll-like creatures that had different names, things I hadn't heard of before, but were really, really, just elaborately thought out and put together. So
Are they by chance, are the goblins and trolls by chance called kobolds or pukas or anything like that?
no, because those are names I knew. No, they had, this was completely its own thing.
All right, that's very cool.
But so this story will kind of take you on a trip to the UK, but not like anyone that you would actually see when you were there. So
that's good. My godson just turned 18 this week, and I sent him a copy of Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. So when I think of London like you're not expecting it, I always think of Neverwhere. That would have been a good book to talk about today. But I will save Neil Gaiman for another time.
Now tell me about the other book you'd like to share.
The Starless Sea, and this is Erin Morgenstern's second book, which just came out a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And this one is, well, how do I begin? Some people prefer Night Circus, and some people prefer Starless Sea, but most people that I've talked to about it just love Erin Morgenstern's writing. If you think about her distinctive writing style that kind of gets into your subconscious with the Night Circus, it becomes very conscious in the Starless Sea. Hey, Devin.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi. You're going to be on YouTube. We're recording a video about books that we've read.
Oh, cool.
So it'll be practice for your and Liam's podcast this summer. So we're talking about books that give us an escape.
A little spring break vacation to another time and place by reading a good book.
All right. So the Starless Sea, again, if you like Erin Morgenstern's style, it sort of gets turned up to 11 in this book in terms of her writing style, because it is very distinctive from page one, and it is really like right there for you. And like, to give you an example, it has to do with like sentence structure, right? Like, it's beyond really good vocabulary. It's also about sentence structure and understanding the nuances of like grammar and punctuation. So on the very first page, it begins, "Sweet Sorrows," that's the chapter title, "once very long ago," right? So you already get this fairy tale feel. "There is a pirate in the basement." The pirate is a metaphor, but also still a person. The basement could rightly be considered a dungeon. The pirate was placed here for numerous acts of a piratey nature considered criminal enough for punishment by those non-pirates who decide such things, right? So you have this very storyteller kind of feeling to this. There's an omniscient narrator here. And one of the things that is really interesting about this book is that it is even more so a braided story than the Night Circus. Right. So everything that she was doing in the first book, we get it turned up to 11 in the second book. And they are set in the same universe, which is just a trivial factoid that you might not even think about if you aren't like part of the Erin Morgenstern fandom, right? Like she
Mhm.
confirmed it and the interwebs went wild about it, right? Because one of the characters, one of those twins that I mentioned in the Night Circus, their names are Poppet and Widget.
Oh,
And Widget actually makes a cameo appearance about 2/3 of the way through the Starless Sea.
oh, nice.
Anyway, so in the Starless Sea, you have multiple storylines which feel very distinct from each other. And the book goes back and forth between those storylines. And we begin to, it seems as if we begin in the real world, but by the time we are fully ensconced in the novel, we have entered a completely different world, the world of the Starless Sea, that is, it's, I mean, it's like all of the alternate dimensions rolled into one. Like take all of the best features from all the alternate dimensions in all the other books and create something entirely original out of it, if that makes any sense. I will say that this book is probably better on the second read. I enjoyed it thoroughly when I read it. I loved it, and many people who had been big fans of the Night Circus told me that they liked the Starless Sea even better. So I couldn't wait. I think I probably like the Night Circus better, but the reason for that is that the Night Circus begins with one main story, and all of the other storylines feed into it. And you know that from the very first chapter. Like, you know that going in, you know where you are, you're oriented to the main characters, you're oriented to the story that's going to be the dominant plot. You know all of that from the beginning. It is very it's not episodic as much as it is deeply rooted in a very rich world built plot, right? Which is not to say that it's a plot driving character kind of book, because that is not what Erin Morgenstern writes, right? Her books are very much about the characters and their agency and the choices that they make and how that drives the story forward. And in fact, in the Night Circus, it literally creates the world that they are living in, right? The Starless Sea takes a bit more time to get your bearings. And when I think about the title of the Starless Sea, imagine being in a boat on the ocean on a cloudy sky at night, and you don't really have your bearings. You don't really entirely know where you are without a compass. The first maybe 50 pages of this book is a little bit like that, because you have different storylines and you don't know how they interact yet. And you don't understand how they get braided together until significantly later in the book. And so my best advice with the Starless Sea is don't give up on it in the first few chapters. Trust the author to get you there, because when you do, you will love where you end up, right? It's a really delicious novel. And it's got the same sense of magic as the Night Circus, but a completely different magical system, if that makes any sense. So if you like stories that have an element of espionage and danger in them, if you like stories that have an undercurrent of magic that is not necessarily like magic tricks and not necessarily like illusory magic, but just an undercurrent of something beyond the natural world. If you like stories with really rich writing and really intense characters, and a sort of a seductive atmosphere, right? The Starless Sea is probably a good book for you. It's got all of these wonderful things, and it is very, like, by the time you get really into the thick of it, it's like a really intense story, and toward the end, it's filled with suspense. Both of these books are standalone novels, right? They're not sequels. They're nothing else. We know because of one little cameo that a reader caught and asked online, they're in the same universe, but they are not the same story at all. But I do love the Starless Sea. It's very like secret society, amazing palaces underground, like honey everywhere. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Quite a good book.
Hmm.
a really excellent second novel after a debut that was actually just a straight banger, amazing book. And it has enough in common that you say, oh, that's an Erin Morgenstern book, but enough different to say she's not copying herself. She's doing something totally original. And one thing that I think is interesting about the Night Circus, it was a NaNoWriMo project. And apparently she spent 3 NaNoWriMos on it. So she did it for 3 years when she was writing the first draft. And then the Starless Sea took a lot of years. I mean, it took her, I don't know, like 8 years to publish her second book. And you can feel the weight of all of that time in the pages, right? You can tell this wasn't just like a quickly written novel to cash in on the first novel's success. You know, she took a lot of time with this, I think. Anyway, that's how it reads. And it's wonderful. Very much an escape. Very much an escape. Give it some time. There are so many things that are braided together that I think a really perceptive reader will pick up on, like, oh, that must be a reference to that earlier chapter. That must be a reference to that other book. So many things like that I think reading it the second time is probably an even richer experience.
Cool. I like that we've taken such a different direction with the kind of world that you could inhabit with these stories.
Yeah.
Because Morgenstern's, I mean, from the Night Circus and from what you're saying about Starless Sea, just that rich descriptive quality that she has. I mean, you really feel like you're transported to those places.
Yeah.
So yeah. And these 2 books just have a ton of great action, and
that's good too.
Yeah, like
I love it.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Cool.
Well, so much for our little non-vacations, our little reading vacation.
Yeah, we'll get out to have a real vacation before too long. So I wanted to have a toast. So cheers.
Vacations, cheers. Which hopefully we'll have again later this year.
Yes.
If people will wear their masks.
Yes, wear your mask.
You would think that the fact that we didn't have much of a cold and flu season would let people know that
masks work.
Anyway, that's fine, whatever. So shall we do this again next month?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, sounds good. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for tuning in for another book chat, and I guess we will see you anon.
Bye.
Bye.